welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom, and we are going to be talking about my personal worst films of 2017. Now, before we get into this, a couple of quick things. First of all, I haven't seen every film, and ones that I know I actively won't like, I won't even bother watching. So you may find there's some omissions in this list that will be kind of somewhat obvious, but if it's a film I know that I don't want to see, I simply won't see it. And I am not a professional reviewer. I do have a full-time job, so I'm not going to waste time watching, especially blockbuster films I know I'm not interested in. Some kind of low-budget films, I don't even know what they're about, so I tend to watch them and then they end up being kind of bad. So you'll see a few of these on here. So the other thing I want to say is as well, there are a couple of films on here that I don't necessarily think are terrible films, but they are very disappointing from what I was expecting. So let's go on the list. Number 10 and number 9 are going to be kind of probably those films. Number 10 is the Star Wars The Last Jedi, and whilst I do not think this is necessarily a bad film in regards to if you were just watching this and you could critique it on its own, you know, nothing to do with the kind of the franchise and the kind of the expectations, you might say it's an okay film. But to me, this film was such a crushing disappointment for a guy who was into Star Wars. I mean, I was a big fan of Star Wars, you know, of the original trilogy, and my kind of interest has kind of slowly petered out throughout the years, obviously from the prequels, and I kind of liked The Force Awakens, but upon later, you know, after leaving it a little, I thought, you know what, I have no desire to see it again. I kind of liked it, but I don't really want to see it again. And then we have Last Jedi, and I truly felt like this was a kick in the balls to kind of my generation of Star Wars fans, and really was saying, here's a whole new franchise, which is basically for a kind of essentially the whole new kids, basically, newer fans. And obviously those guys might like it and might love it, but I felt like it was a passing of the torch, not just to new characters, but to its fans as well. And number 9, a similar thing, but obviously we're talking about a much lower budget film here. And this is a film I was really anticipating. I thought the trailer looked great, the concept seemed great, but when I saw it, it was very disappointing. And that was The Monster Project. And this might be one you've not heard of, but the idea being that it's a found footage film, and we have a group of filmmakers that put out an ad and want to interview people who they think are real monsters, and we end up having this kind of this spooky house, and they interview a guy who's like a skinwalker or a werewolf, a girl who's a vampire, and a girl who is kind of possessed by a demon. It sounds great, the concept sounds great, but the execution here was a little lacking, shall we say, at the least, and ultimately was a kind of a disappointing film, and I felt squandered the really kind of like quite neat concept. Number 8 is going to be a movie called Anti-Human, and this was such a kind of slog to sit through. It was a kind of a low budget horror kind of sci-fi movie, but it just dragged and dragged and dragged, and it was just so boring, and ultimately it was just a snooze fest, and it was a real struggle to have to sit through this movie. This is when I got to the screen, so I'm going to have to watch it, but man, it wasn't very good. Number 7 is a movie called Moth, and this was a found footage film that when you watch it, you're thinking, this movie was an absolute complete waste of time, and when it's kind of the reveal happens, man, you're going to be so disappointed. It kind of makes out like it's going to be this great creature feature. It isn't. It's poor, it's boring, and nothing happens. Number 6 is a movie called Bloodwoods, and I feel bad ragging about this because it's such a low budget film, but it's such a kind of a crap low budget film. I mean, it's essentially about these kind of group of gangsters that rob a bank and end up hiding out in this kind of like this house in the middle of the woods, and there happens to be a vampire in the woods. It fancied itself as a bit of a kind of like a Dusk Till Dawn style movie, I think, but the acting here and the kind of just the direction is so terrible. It just is actually kind of quite laughable in regards to the amateurish level of this movie. Number 5, a movie called Killing Gunther. This was touted as an Arnold Schwarzenegger action comedy, and he doesn't actually show up until the very last kind of like 10, 15 minutes of the film, and then prior to that is a bunch of kind of like amateur, it seems, assassins trying to kind of assassinate Gunther, who played by a stuntman in the kind of in the wide shots and stuff like that, with various misadventures. It's not funny, it's not interesting, and you just feel kind of cheated that you kind of were led to believe this was an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of action movie, and it really pulls the rug out from under you, and it ultimately becomes a very disappointing film. Number 4 is a movie called The Sound, and but it sounds a bit, this pun there, it kind of on the surface seems like it might be an interesting horror film, and it's about a researcher played by Rose McGowan who goes into this kind of subway to essentially she tries to disprove paranormal stuff by using kind of sound waves and studying sound waves and stuff like that. And McGowan's character, I know she's been in the media quite a lot with the whole kind of Harvey Weinstein thing, but she just looks like she's just full of Botox. Her face just doesn't move. For some reason, I know she's shaved her head recently because, you know, that's what she likes to do. So they put her in this awful wig, and why just have an actress either have the hair with short hair or get an actress with real hair? The wig looks awful, but it's just a slow, boring movie that you feel doesn't really do anything, and it just comes across as such a kind of like a slug to sit through. And Rose McGowan, unfortunately, is just really the kind of the main kind of like anchor of this film, because she just pulls this thing down. Number 3, Alien Reign of Man, a low-budget kind of science fiction movie that seems to be, this film, I'm not kidding you, it seems to be a secret. The whole film is sequences of 2 people talking, and then another 2 people talking, and then another 2 people talking, and that's the whole movie. It's such a kind of like shitty, low-budget kind of science fiction movie that maybe has some, if you screenshotted some of the kind of the images, it might look cool, but some really terrible CGI as well. And obviously, it's just kind of one of these things that like to think it's somewhat of a kind of a intelligent science fiction, but it has kind of really kind of like cheesy elements as well. It's not good. Number 2 is Jeepers Creepers 3. The film that destroyed this franchise from ever becoming anything other than a kind of like shitty straight to video now. Obviously the director has a certain amount of controversy. We're not really going to be just talking about that, or that's not going to affect my reason, but this is a film that to me made this whole series crap, to be honest with you. It was a sequel that actually sits between 1 and 2. So you know this movie has no stakes, because you know what the status quo is going to be, and this is the problem with prequels. And it's just nothing. I mean, they packed themselves in a corner, having this creature only become, you know, alive every kind of like 23 years or whatever it is. Why didn't they just not set it in their future? I don't know. But it just really promises you that it's going to kind of reveal all these kind of secrets about the creeper, and it teases you about the origin, and then just doesn't show you. It's such a frustrating film, and it just feels like a complete waste of time. Number 1, we are talking about the Bruce Willis movie Once Upon a Time in Venice. Now, Bruce Willis has been making a rash of these kind of straight to DVD, straight to video on demand movies, and I haven't seen all of them, to be fair. But this one, it is terrible. It feels like it wants to be a bit like a John Wick film. I've got this guy trying to kind of like, it's Private Eye, played by Willis, who's kind of trying to get his dog, which has been kidnapped. And it's got some pretty, you know, it's got a pretty decent cast here. You know, you've got Jason Momoa, you've got a whole bunch of kind of familiar faces here. But it doesn't seem to have a script. It just seems to be a bunch of vignettes, just kind of like strung together in a kind of like, in nonsensical story. Nothing, there's no real kind of through narrative. It's such a bizarre movie, but it just seems to be a whole bunch of scenes thrown together with a kind of the loosest and weakest possible plot. Willis just looks like he's asleep through the whole film, and there's some truly stupid moments with naked skateboarding through with Willis. Obviously a stunt double, but it's ridiculous. And you know, it's meant to be a comedy. It's not funny. So that is my worst list. Now there's probably a load of films there that you haven't seen. And, you know, some of these films are very low budget films, so you may feel that's a little bit unfair, but this is only my personal opinion. These are films I would never want to watch again, and there you go. So probably a lot of these films that a lot of people haven't heard of. Like I've said, actively the largest budget, big budget films I probably won't even bother seeing. So anyway, what do you think of my list? What are your worst movies of 2017? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.